No, I'm not going to respond. I'm just going to say thank you very much to three people who I've learned so much from. It's really a gift to hear your comments. And you can open it if there are questions.
Yeah, so if there are any questions, you can pick up like a few questions and let Lina respond.
Everyone's so tired.
Any questions?
Shai looks like he has a question.
So,
Everyone, because Shai always asks questions. You don't have to put him on the spot. Poor guy.
no, I actually wanted to follow up on something that Louis said, and I wondered what your response or what your further thoughts on this are. So, first of all, Louis captured the distinction between your work and Walid Khalaf, that he looks, so he's also contrarian and he's trying to revisit the tradition of the historiographical tradition, but he does it from within, so he's trying to capture a certain internal Muslim tradition with its sources and is opposing any discussion, this is what I understood, of external influences. And you also don't think of influences, but you look at a much broader hybrid context. And then Louis said, and I thought that was interesting, that if you look within so that there's a way to reconcile Walid Khalaf's position and your position, and I wonder whether there is such a way. And this is not what you said, but this is what I take from it. That if you look within the tradition itself is open to thinking about this hybridity, because the tradition itself fully acknowledges the way in which there's a shared space, both with Jewish sources and with pre-Islamic sources. And so I wonder whether this is a way to reconcile your positions, or whether this is or whether there's a big difference still there, and it would come to play, especially if we look at non-Jewish sources, which your book doesn't examine as closely. But if we look at Roman other contextual sources.
So I should first explain that Wa'ed Halat was my teacher. He was on my dissertation committee. So that there needs to be sort of a disclaimer about that. I don't think, actually, that Nourik was saying that Wa'ed's position is from within the tradition. I don't even think that Wa'ed would characterize his work in that way. And I'm actually suspicious of the notion of a Muslim tradition and this kind of dichotomization of a Western scholarly tradition versus a Muslim tradition is actually one of the objects of scrutiny within the book itself, where I position them as actually overlapping in many ways. So where I differ from Wa'ed Halat is where I differ with Halat and Krona, as Nourik mentioned, which is the kind of unilinear developmental understanding of history. So that's the major critique in the book of Halat, and that also relates then to the kind of parthenogenetic ways of understanding Islamic law and its parentage. So I'm not sure it can be reconciled.
Any additional questions?
I have one. I think it's a kind of, might be a follow-up, but also the intra-Islamic discussion over the sources of Islamic law in general. We know this arises very much in terms of interpretations all the time.
So one of the chapters of the book talks about ilm usul al-hadith and the ways in which effectively pre-modern Muslim scholars created what I call archives, and that those archives, and I use subaltern theory to talk about this, have been dismantled by contemporary scholarship. But it's not my claim that those archives are somehow archives that we should trust completely and then therefore should not analyze, right? I mean, there are plenty of ways for us to use critical theory to understand those old archives. But I talk about the ways in which the archive has been deconstructed as being problematic because they're based on philosophically untenable ideas about the nature of sources. So the critique of source criticism is used then to differentiate the way contemporary Western scholarship looks at those sources versus how pre-modern Muslim scholars looked at those sources, but not making the claim that the pre-modern Muslim scholars were perfect in their understanding of those sources. Does that answer the question?
No, I'm wondering how come like that Western historians relied very much on particular sources while throughout like centuries there is a discussion
Oh.
over various sources within the Islamic tradition. So how do you explain this? Like in prima facie, it's too obvious. There is a discussion of various sources that should serve in the
Right.
research.
Like
too.
the over-reliance on Tabari or something like that? Like the over-reliance on certain kinds of texts?
Yeah, like you're
But
studying
it's-
Islamic law or traditions in general, while Islamic scholars within right the intra-religious discussions and interpretations rely on a various realm of sources, whereas Western scholars or the critique goes on how they focus on one type of sources and not on a variety of sources.
Yeah, I think it's
So
easy.
it's like the gap.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I disagree.
I'll ask one question. If you look at the scholarship of the Bible, can you see in it any approach that resembles somewhat your approach?
So you mean the biblical criticism?
Various
Specific?
various types of kind of reading the Bible in its historical context, archaeological context, a critical reading of the texts, the construction of the texts.
I wouldn't say that because, well, there's a lot of critique within the book on biblical criticism and the way in which that was used effectively then on Islamic sources and used incorrectly because it was taking the same tools used to analyze the Bible and just applying them to Islamic sources without recognizing the differences between the biblical text and the Islamic sources themselves. But where in contemporary biblical literature I would say that my work intersects would just be the application of critical theory in biblical studies. So queer theory in biblical studies, and et cetera, those kinds of things, and yes, then there's an overlap in terms of what I'm interested in doing.
Thanks. We had a fascinating
long.
evening, a long one. I would like to thank the three commentators,
very much.
the organizers, and most of all, Lina.
No, David too. Thank you.